Hey, everybody. This is Luke Johnson and Robert Schut, and we're doing our third discussion of Soren Kierkegaard's The Point of View for my work as an author, a report to history. I have my book this time. I didn't absentmindedly leave it in the basement, although I'll probably be just sort of commenting with topics off the top of my head. I will say this, you can go and beta test the Noetic website, noetic.online. I'm reading a lot of early journal content from JSTOR and putting it up there. It's been a really enlightening process. Also, this project is totally monstrous, so if there are any billionaire philanthropists out there who want to set aside, I don't know, $10 or $15 million to build intellectual Facebook, hit me up, philosophyluke@gmail.com. So, without further ado, let me introduce Bob Schut as our discussion leader again today, and hopefully I'll have something clever to add to the conversation.
I'm sure you will, Luke. I'm sure you will. Well, actually 2 weeks ago, we left off at page 44 from our book on the point of view. And the title of this section is The Difference in My Personal Mode of Existence, corresponding to the essential difference in the works. So here he's going to compare his personal life, how he lives his life, to his works, how he wrote about his philosophy, and how they parallel to each other. At least how he made them parallel each other. This wasn't kind of a natural thing for him. He changed the way he lived his life in order to parallel the works that he was doing. He says that authorship is a very serious calling, and that his life must be appropriate to what he is writing. And, I think that's great advice for any writer who wants to write, the kind of stuff that we would write about philosophy or about life, is that I think his life, if he wants to be an author, it's like wanting to be a teacher. You need to walk the walk and not just talk the talk. And that's, I guess, what he would say. It probably put it into that phrase. But let me start off with the reading page 44. I'm going to do a little bit more reading this time, Luke, because
That's fine.
There's a few things that jumped out at me. I hope I just don't overdo it, but these were really good, and I couldn't have put them in better words than he did. And I felt like to try to reduce them would be to not do justice to them. So on page 44, they do not realize that the press in general, as an expression of the abstract and impersonal communication of ideas, and the daily press in particular, because of its formal indifference to the question whether what it reports is true or false, contributes enormously to the general demoralization, for the reason that the impersonal, which for the most part is irresponsible and incapable of repentance, is essentially demoralizing. They do not realize that anonymity, as the most absolute expression for the impersonal, the irresponsible, the unrepentant, is a fundamental source of the modern demoralization. Boy, I thought that was today just so appropriate for what we see going on today on TV and in the news about this abstract of reality, and how it's demoralizing everybody because it no longer cares what's true or false. It's not even trying to come up with what's true or false. It's sensationalizing everything. And everything is done for the effect, not for the truth.
Well, what are the media, right?
Yeah.
Has to get eyeballs, right, on their product, right, in order to fund their operation.
Yeah.
Right? And what sells? Sex and fear, right?
Yeah.
And I think, I don't consume any of modern media except for what I get on the internet, which I'm a big proponent of. Turn your TV off because I think it's poison. But to me, the little that I can tell from the news, it's just fear and sex.
Yeah. And sometimes they bring the two of them together too.
Yeah.
And especially to lately, we've been hearing kind of both of those, where accusations about people that 40 years ago they did this or that, which, whether true or not, it's just, again, this is what's getting publicity. not what's really true or what's really false. But the point he's making here is that the press in general is an expression of the abstract and is impersonal. And that's the issue here. Because it's an abstraction, which we know from reading other books from Kierkegaard, is something that he was very much against. It's indifferent to whether something is true or false. And because of that indifference, it spills over into the public. And therefore, it demoralizes the public. And this is certainly true today. It's not... sometimes we have to be so careful because we don't know what's influencing us.
What do you think he means by demoralizes the public?
I think it actually affected the way that they saw one another, the way that they saw truth, the way that they saw faith. Meaning to demoralize literally would mean to remove their morality. And I think we can see that in our society, that morality is being removed. I'm not quite sure how he saw it in his day. I can't really tell you exactly. But I know in our day... Yeah,
I think you can say that it's desensitizing us to sex, fear, violence, and things like that, and creating a cycle where in some way we might be more violent to our fellow human beings as a result of consuming this media.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's called programming for a reason, right? It's programming us to sort of repeat the news cycle in a way, does it not?
It does. And I know you were just saying you were a proponent of the internet, and I realize that, and I use the internet too, and I really watch very little TV. But even this is true among the internet, because in the internet there's such anonymity and abstraction that we can't tell reality from what's unreal anymore. So
what do we have to do? We have to have, in order to do that, right? In order to tell truth from falsity, right? We have to have incredible discernment. We have to be able to prove what we say, and I think we need the help of the Holy Ghost, to be honest.
Yeah, but now I have a question here that I kind of ran into in my own notes, and I'm wondering about this. We have free speech in this country. That's our claim. That's our big claim here, is that we have free speech. But are we now living in an age, Luke, where this is turning around and kind of becoming more destructive now? That this abuse that we're seeing here brings us to this futuristic world of dictatorships as being the lesser of the evils? In other words, is free speech bringing us to a place where we're now going to start looking for truth and, what would I say, protection from all the lies, and now run to this kind of futuristic dictatorial society to protect us from the lies?
Well, it depends on how we define truth and lies, right? There is an element. I don't think it's going to succeed. I'm actually pretty optimistic about the future. I've gone through some dystopian phases as of late, but I'm actually pretty optimistic, at least for the next 10 or 15 years or so. Right, but we're seeing that to some degree, right? So we're, at least in America and perhaps globally, we're witnessing narrative paradigm shifts, and the narrative, certain individuals who have had control of the narrative for many, many years are losing control of that narrative, and a new narrative is being constructed. And so people don't like that. And so there are these calls to create algorithms through the internet in order to prevent people from seeing certain information. So we can talk about a technocratic dictatorship, right, where we hand over all our control to Fuhrer Google or whatever, right, to the dictator that may be the one sorting out all our information. Or we may want to put greater restrictions on individuals who get to talk about different points of view on the cable news networks and things of that nature. So there could the desire to have tight regulation on exploding free speech could give rise to this dictatorship. But to be honest, I think the genie's out of the bottle. I think it's too late. So I think we're going to be overwhelmed with information. Now, that doesn't mean that it couldn't lead to another form of dictatorship, but I think the one that's trying to be propped up in order to sort the information out for us and keep the bad stuff in, or bad stuff out and the good stuff in. It's not going to happen. The genie's out of the bottle.
Okay.
But I could see other ways that dictatorships could happen. I could see a situation where, if someone becomes such a trusted authority of truth and is repudiating all previous narratives, that they start to take on a godlike status, right? So that they become this beacon of reality, of truth, that they are no longer a man, right? That they get transmogrified into some sort of deity, and then you have the cult of personality come up. So I'm under, just because I'm not totally dystopian anymore doesn't mean that I'm a utopian.
Yeah.
We have to be on guard for it all over the place.
So we might see a theocratic society coming along, or at least making an attempt to come along.
That could happen. That could totally happen.
Now, it's interesting here, he also continues on with this thought, and he says that the author, now he's going to speak about the author, of which he is one, and of which you and I are kind of one. The author is an X. He's impersonal. So I've kind of taken this one step further. Even if a person is a celebrity, he's really unknown to us. We can never forget about that. We don't know the person that we see on TV or in the movies or on the internet. Even you and I, Luke, for people who don't know us. But they're abstractions or a portrayal of a person. And this is what kind of plays into this idea that we were talking about earlier, that life becomes a theater. And we're really playing roles on this. Now, you and I, we are who we are. I mean, we don't really put on any airs. I mean, we're not acting, there's no stage makeup here or anything. This is, Luke and Bob in the Raw. So, we are who we are.
That's exactly what deceivers would want people to believe.
Yeah. True. But it's up to the individuals, it's up to the people watching to make that distinction. But always keep it in the back of your mind. The person on TV is not a real person. It's not really who he is. What's
super funny is I mentioned earlier how I'm reading these journal articles so people will have audible versions of academic journals and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And about every other one I read, like I'm reading one on Dante's Inferno right now, which is totally brilliant. It's like from 1895. This woman wrote it named Susan Plough. And it's lucid, it's clear, it's this beautiful rendering of what happens in the Inferno. But then I'll read ones that like G.W.F. Hegel wrote, and it's completely... I have no idea what's going on. It's totally mystifying. It's total obfuscation. I can't make heads or tails of it. But what's funny is, right, I'm just reading a script, right? And so in the future, when people listen to this, they're going to actually think I understand what's being said just because I can pronounce the words. And so I can imagine a scenario where people will think I'm way smarter than I actually am because I read these things. Yeah. And I'm just reading I'm really just reading a teleprompter. I have no idea what the heck I'm saying half the time. And the same thing goes with people on TV and the politicians with the teleprompter. They have no idea what they're saying half the time.
I agree with you 100%. 100%, yeah.
Have you seen Anchorman where the teleprompter glitches and they put things into the teleprompter and they read them anyway and they have no conscious reflection of it? It's a hysterical scene.
I've seen things like that. I'm not sure that it's that show, but I've seen that kind of situation take place, and it is funny. Okay, he goes on to page 45. 45A is the section. He says, the personal mode of existence in relation to the aesthetic works. So now he's bringing us, remember we talked a couple weeks ago about the difference between being aesthetic and being religious. And we'll kind of go over that again, but more the aesthetic of the sensual things in life, how we perceive life through the senses. The other one is how we perceive life through the spirit. So he comes to his own mode of existence as a religious author who began as an aesthetic one. So we know, or at least we can presume, that he is a religious author. He was a religious author. But he had to put on this aesthetic these aesthetic clothes to appear to be aesthetic at the time. So he appeared incognito, he calls it, a religious author disguised as an aesthetic one. He had to play, or in his words, exist in a world that wanted to be deceived. And we were just talking a little bit earlier about that the alternative to what did we call it again? To becoming aware of our existential reality, the alternative is to be deceived. And what he's saying is that there are people who, and I think he's saying the majority of people want to be deceived.
Oh yeah.
And so this plays into a big role here for him and for us too. And Luke, that's the kind of thing what we do here. I think what we try to do is take Kierkegaard's work, which was written for the Danish people of the 1800s, and try to update it and see his work through our eyes. And I hope that performs a service for people.
Totally.
So he says that in this age, many support one another in order to gain an advantage. Again, I think we could certainly say that's true about our age as well. It's probably one of those universal truths that a lot of times people support one another because they see an advantage somewhere in the future for them. Part of it is hiding oneself so that one could never know who one truly was. So it's this...
That was interesting that that was kind of interesting that Kierkegaard didn't want anybody to know who he really was on some level. That was one of the big revelations from this. He didn't want people to know how afflicted he was with his melancholy, especially as a young child.
Yeah, we get into that quite a bit later on in this work here. Fortunately, he talks about that, his depression, and I think we can all relate to that. But he does so in an extreme way. He used his depression, I don't want to get too far ahead, but his depression was his motivation. It was part of what drove him to do what he did. So he says that, I say that people are turned into personas like those on the magazine rack in the supermarket. It's done with total cooperation of the public and their eagerness to take a rumor over truth. So I'm taking what he said, and I'm looking at it in today. I don't know. Yeah, we still have those magazines today. People buy those magazines. They know they're lies, but somehow they enjoy being deceived about these movie stars and how miserable their multi-million-dollar lives really are.
Do you think they know they're alive? Do you think people know that it's a lie? Because I know a lot of individuals who watch these reality shows and strive to have a life that looks like this Hollywood reality. I'm not sure people understand the depths of despair. I don't think a lot of people understand. Well, see, I can't be too direct here, but those people to have that sort of fame, you have to make a pact in this world. There are certain things you have to give up, and
I know.
That's all I'm going to say.
The king of deception, I think you're talking about here. But yeah, that's great. That's a good point. I brought up magazines, those magazines, movie star type magazines or Inquirer or something. But you brought up the reality TV, and I think that's probably more updated. That people watch reality TV.
And if we're under this illusion that they are somehow happy or something like that, you just have to look at all the sexual perversion that's going on right now that people are waking up to.
Or the opposite is sometimes people see how miserable the lives are on reality TV and feel better about themselves.
That might be happening.
Yeah.
The little bit of reality TV I've ever watched has always made me feel like my IQ plummeted like 80 points in the span of a half hour. Always made me feel pretty terrible about myself.
Yeah, no, I understand. So he said now he had to exist in absolute isolation and guard his solitude, and at the same time he had to appear in society as an aesthete, a man of pleasure. So how does this guy, who's a religious man, portray himself in the public as a man of pleasure? And that's the deceit that he's talking about, how he had to deceive people in order to bring them to their senses. There are those who want to use communications, newspaper, internet, Facebook, whatever, to see how one could win a reputation for themselves. So it's not about truth and falsity, but about fame and ego. So for some people, Facebook is all about their own fame. It's not about communications, but it's about using communications to profit themselves, to exaggerate their lives. This is the time of year, Luke, when I get Christmas cards from people. And I don't know if they do this out by you at all.
Yeah, where they write the long letter about how perfect their family is.
Yeah, and I'm reading and I'm thinking, the last time I talked to this person, they were so depressed because their life was so miserable. But now this letter makes their life sound so charming, and it makes me think, man, my life is crap compared to this person, and so you've read those kind of letters as well, huh?
Yeah, I always thought they were funny in the past, but I mean, I think it happens in a more subtle way with the social networks that we have. Like, we're just building these mausoleums to ourselves, right?
That was my point. Yeah. So he wanted to be able to work, but did not want to become a celebrity in order to be in the limelight. So some people might think that this is a way to create converts. If I become a celebrity, maybe I can win converts to Christ. But the problem that I see, and not in all cases, some people can do this successfully, but unfortunately I've seen too many that once they get a taste of the ego and the taste of fame, that it's not so easy to give up and come back into the religious. So what Kierkegaard wanted to do, that differentiates the two, he wanted to only temporarily become an aesthete. It was only for the time period of a deception. Then he was going to come back into the religious again. Some people see this when they're youth. Oh, well, I'm going to become a famous celebrity so I can win converts. The problem is they never come back out of it again into the religious. They remain in that egotistical state, right? The celebrity.
And some is even worse, right? Like you have like some of these people that are like Christian artists that like openly proclaim their allegiance to Lucifer later on, right? Like,
Yeah.
They'll come up and they'll be like these little kids that are, singing gospel songs or whatever, and then they become big professional pop stars, and they're just like, doing satanic rituals at the Super Bowl.
Yeah. Well, I haven't watched the Super Bowl in a while, but
you're not missing anything.
Okay. He says that it's not truth that rules the world, but illusion. I don't know. Do you believe that, Luke?
Yeah. Of course, I believe that. That's why I can't say what I really want to say right now.
I know.
I have to sprinkle breadcrumbs throughout this entire conversation. I can't tell anybody what I really believe. Okay. If I did, I'd be strung up.
Well, you're in your aesthete clothing right now. Okay.
I can't believe you thought that was a serious question about which prevailed in this world, truth or illusion.
I kind of set you up for that one, Luke.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm going to need a second to get the giggles out of me.
Okay. His goal, Kierkegaard's goal, was not to profit by this illusion, but to be disposed to the truth. And that's a big line in the sand or line in the road, a bright line that says, I'm not doing this. I'm not becoming an aesthete here just to profit from it. I'm doing this because I want to bring truth into people's lives. But Christendom allowed themselves to be seduced by such things as newspapers. So the Christian faith, which he calls Christendom, but to distinguish again, Christendom is the aesthetic, the false Christians who fall into this category where they get into the aesthetic and cannot get out again. Is it fair to say that this still goes on today in a more illusory form using higher technology? Well, I think we kind of already beat that question to death. The answer is absolutely yes. He's set up in some way to deceive, but in the interest of truth. Okay. So why did he do this is my own question. And my own answer, hopefully you'll agree with me, is because he knew human nature perhaps better than most psychologists and sociologists. I think he was the ultimate or the epitome of a psychologist and a sociologist rolled into one. He knew people so well, and he knew people because he knew himself so well. I think and he saw people's reaction to him. And we were talking a little earlier that I tend to step back from reality and watch it. And I think he's probably been the leader of that technique. He's probably, the master of being able to step back and watch people and how they react to him. And I think it's important for all of us sometimes step back from reality and take a look at it, and take a look at the role you are playing in reality. Okay.
Yeah, totally. I think the thing that I would add there, well, first of all, I think you're quite right to say that Kierkegaard understands the human condition better than most psychologists and psychiatrists. Like, I don't know. I just went through Jung's Man and His Symbols, and sometimes I'll revisit the ideas of Freud, and I'm just kind of like, do these really have a bearing in reality? Or is this an actual depiction of the human psyche? Also, I'm suspicious. I'm suspicious of. To be honest, I'm suspicious of a lot in that field, but something that's kind of interesting to me, and I sort of mentioned it earlier, is I would, and maybe such a book already exists, but I would really like to know how much of Kierkegaard's own ideas were impressed upon him by his father. I have a feeling that his father was a very, very brilliant man that was able to instill certain profound truths within Soren at a young age, beyond his melancholic disposition, but was really able to communicate the realities of the world to him. I think there's got to be more to that relationship, and it's got to be very complex and complicated. I wouldn't be surprised if Soren's father delivered some very hard truths to him at quite a young age that gave him an advantage in this philosophical development. Because I just can't, it's very hard for me to imagine just how much he was able to do in so few years, and how he was able to not shift his view, that he was always this sort of religious author and develop the plan of the authorship, before his 30th birthday, presumably, and see it through over the course of 20 years. I feel like he had to have some help, and I wouldn't be surprised if his father was the helper.
Well, I think he was predisposed to this. I think we'll get into it later on. He uses that very word. I think he was predisposed to that kind of ability, but he also had that ability, that genius in this case. And so I think his father pushed him in the right direction. And I think his father was probably always on his mind thinking about that image. And so, yeah, I think it's a dynamic that he had between him and his father. I don't think his father just poured knowledge into him. I think Kierkegaard needed that point, needed that shove in the right direction, with his father probably did with his own unique advice. But Kierkegaard was certainly a genius in that area, and was able to take up where his father left off, so to speak. So now, to become part of this illusion that he was creating, he would go out in public for short periods of time, and to show that he appeared to be an idler, someone who was not to be taken seriously. And this would include going to the theater or the cafe to make just an appearance, as though he had nothing better to do with his life. So as an author, the reality for Kierkegaard was that he really didn't have time for visitors. So for Kierkegaard, he wasn't an entertainer, and he didn't really want to live that kind of life. So he had to kind of, imitate it. So when he went out to coffee shops and so forth, he went out to be seen by others, But he was probably thinking, I can't wait to get home and work on my book here. But I got to do this in order to appear as though I have nothing better to do. And he said that on page 50, there's a list of names that were given to him. He says, if Copenhagen ever has been of one opinion about anybody, I venture to say that it was of one opinion about me, that I was an idler, a dawdler. I don't know what this word is here, a feineur, a frivolous bird, an intellect, perhaps brilliant and witty, etc. But as for seriousness, I lacked it utterly. So this is the image he wanted to create, and apparently he was successful in creating that image. This is just what he wanted to portray about himself as an aesthete. So he, as I said, he's successful. Now we go into his despair, which we talked about earlier. Here he admits, this is kind of a little bit his confessional here. He admits that he was melancholy and that his griefs were deep into his soul and that he broke away from the world. He spent time in prayer and devout meditation. He found satisfaction in life as a kind of monk, and his home became his monastery and his writings, his ministry. That's kind of my own assessment of it. But I see him that as he was like a monk, but he wasn't really a monk. And I thought, well, why wasn't he a monk? You know, maybe he would have been better off as a monk. But the problem being a monk is that he would have had to live in this very disciplined world as a monk, and he wouldn't have the freedom to write what he wanted to write. And this is one of the reasons that I don't really go back to school and get any more advanced degrees, because I have to do it their way. And I don't want to do it their way. I want to read Kierkegaard. I want to study the Bible and Kierkegaard. And I want to write about both of those things. And if I go to get a more advanced degree, I can't do that with my time. I have to study what they want me to study. And I just don't want to do that. So he found satisfaction in life as a kind of monk, but not the kind that we might think of. His deception of portraying himself as an aesthete was working, and the public seemed to love it because they focused in on who he was negatively. They could write about him and talk about him, ridicule him, even mock him, and felt perfectly comfortable in doing that. But he wasn't worried about being accepted because he wasn't tempted by them and their compliments. So he never took the public seriously. When they were complimenting them, he didn't take it seriously. And when they were ridiculing them, he didn't take it seriously. So he kind of was aloof in a way to them, or at least so separated from them that it didn't matter to him.
Can I ask you to theorize on something for a second?
Absolutely, sure.
So, you know, he had this theology education. And though he couldn't have become a monk because, I mean, he wasn't a Catholic, but he could have become a preacher.
Yeah.
And, you know, he oftentimes talks about how he fantasized about becoming a preacher even towards the end of his life. Mm-hmm. Why do you think he didn't tack that way initially? Like, what's your understanding of that? I mean, if ultimately he sort of, to placate his father, he went down that route, and he harbored a desire for that. I mean, why didn't he just jump right into sermonizing rather than developing these texts, and maybe see that as a concurrent effort, that he would also be a sermonizer and the developer of this large body of work? I think I know the answer, but I'd like to hear your perspective. I mean, I think the answer is generally that he felt he was on a mission from God, and that he needed to separate himself in such a way to accomplish this particular task, and that it couldn't be done at the same time. He would have had too many responsibilities. But I don't know. I mean, what's your take on that?
Well, he talks about it a little later on, but I'll go ahead, and, since it's in context now. He tried it. He tried to be that pastor in the country, it said. But I don't think that fit him because he was limited. I can't see Kierkegaard giving a 15-minute discussion about anything. Okay? I mean, I'm sure he was long-winded, and he wanted the feedback. Giving a 15-minute sermon and having people nodding off to sleep while he's giving a sermon just doesn't fit him. And I think that he had so much. God was feeding, as we'll find out, God was feeding him so much that he had to release it somehow. And being a pastor in the country just wasn't going to release everything God gave him.
You know what's so interesting is that we only have Kierkegaard's writings to contend with, right? And so when we look at these writings, like, it's hard for me to imagine anyone falling asleep during a Kierkegaard sermon. But wouldn't it be totally ironic if he was just a terrible speaker? Like how much did that really, we don't know. We don't have any record of this, right? Like, maybe he, because I know a lot of people who are brilliant writers and stuff like that, but cannot express themselves verbally. And what if it was just as simple as that he had so many thoughts that they couldn't come out through his mouth?
I think that's possible. I know that it gives us a little bit of information that he was very good at putting people down. What do they call them? The fork tongue? Was that his nickname? So
the fork, yeah.
Yeah, even
the fork.
The fork. Yeah, even as a child, he was good in putting people down if they challenged him. So I think he had good speaking skills, but I think what you said is right. He was just flooded with information by God that, as we'll see later on, I don't want to give it away, but he gives a little poetic verse here about how he was unable to kind of control himself and direct himself because of this flood of information that God was giving him.
Right.
But he did say that it was a kind of ecstasy for him in knowing that he was putting something over on them. So he's kind of sitting back, watching, listening to everybody ridicule him. But that little bit of a smile, I can see him with a smile on his face, thinking, you think you're really doing something and hurting me, but this is all imitation and you're not getting it.
Yeah.
So in order to pull something like this off, he would have to be careful that he didn't begin to see himself as better than others, though, as though he was looking down on them. And this is always the danger of genius. So even though he may have been in this ecstasy was probably a temptation to think that he was better than the other people. And in a way, we think he was, but it's not right for him to think that. Because he was there to help them. He was there to draw the people out of that aesthetic into the religious. But when you're really, and I don't know, because I'm not really a genius, but does a person who have that
This is a part where I stop you and say, of course you are, Bob.
Yeah. Now we're losing credibility very quickly here. So let's recover ourselves. Look, let's say you are the genius, okay? Do you find it tempting to think you're better than other people?
No. Okay. I actually think that might be a sign of genius, is that you sort of reluctantly embrace it. Because I think it's a question of like what genius is, but at least from my point of view is that I assume the equality of all understanding and intelligence is, and so like, when I go out in the world and trying to have conversation with people, I try to just whether it's a janitor or a college professor, I talk to them in the same way.
Mm-hmm.
And
Good.
And but after a while, if individuals keep having trouble processing what you're saying, regardless of rank, and I actually find that the more intelligent people have trouble processing some of the things that I say. It's the untouchables that actually I have the best communion with.
Mm-hmm.
You start to ask yourself, maybe I you start to ask yourself, well, maybe I am touched in some way, even though the idea would never naturally present it to me. I mean, but if you it's a thought. It's a thought, at least, that crosses my mind. If we were to theoretically presuppose that I was in the G category, which I'm highly doubtful of, but
well,
I don't know. But then there are a lot of people who are geniuses, and they revel in it and let everybody know and brag about their IQ and photographic memory.
You mean you don't have a little card that has your IQ on it and you carry around with you in your wallet?
No, I'm not a card-carrying member of Mensa and have no desire to be.
Okay. Yeah, I would be too embarrassed to tell you my IQ. So
it's very cringe. I find that whole thing to be very cringe-worthy.
Yeah. Okay, in December 1845, he comes out with Concluding Postscript. Okay, this is a great work that he does. And he talked about the printer called Luno. And I wrote that note down because I think it was 2 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago, you asked me a question about the editor. And I said, oh yeah, he had an editor. I remember reading that.
Yeah, you were right.
But he had a printer, Luno. But he did his own editing, so to speak. But his printer, and I guess the printer might be an editor, it might spell check or his spell checker or something. Yeah. But Luno was the guy I was thinking about, and just wanted to make sure that I made that clear. So, but this book, this work, Concluding Postscripts, was a turning point for him as an author. It represents the problem of becoming a Christian. This is where he began the transition into his religious writings. So this is where he kind of peaks out, where he kind of gets over the hill, and now he comes down on the religious side. And as we said earlier, he realized that he must change his mode of existence to reflect what he was doing as a writer. So now, as his writing genre changes into a religious writer, he has to now change his life into a religious life.
He's metamorphosizing. He
is. Or at least he's eliminating the imitation and hopefully coming to who he truly is. Now, this is a really important section here because he talks about the providence of God. He thought that providence was in his life, working with him as he wrote and portrayed himself. He says that he saw Copenhagen as ironical. Yet, he says that irony is absolutely unsocial. And if it's in the majority, it's not irony because irony focuses upon the individual. I have to admit he kind of lost me a little bit with this thought because...
Can you say it once more?
Oh, he says that he saw Copenhagen as ironical, the whole city. Yet he says that irony is absolutely unsocial, and if it's in the majority, it's not irony, because irony focuses upon the individual. He says, and one last comment on it, he says, irony is vulgarity, and vulgarity is always popular. So I kind of lost him on what he was trying to get there.
Is he just saying that when irony becomes manifested over a mass society that it becomes vulgarity?
That may be what he's trying to say. I'm going to take that as...
Well, let's say that is what he's saying. Yeah. How does that make sense, right? Like the person... So we have to understand first what Kierkegaard means by practicing irony, right?
Yeah.
Because that's no small feat to understand.
No, it's not.
Because from my understanding of the authorship, there's at least two forms of irony that I think he talks we really need to do the concept of irony so we have a better understanding of what we're talking about here. But there would be Socratic irony, and then sort of is it an aesthetic form of irony that he speaks of?
Probably.
But I think the idea of there being an ironical society would be one that would deflate all value in things, and then and then that's where you get the sort of barbarous vulgarity, is that nothing is esteemed and nothing is sacred.
Yeah, it may just be a play on words where he's saying irony, we really talk about irony or speak about irony involving the individual, but when it grows and grows and grows, and he kind of is saying that in the next paragraph, which I'll read in a minute, but as it gets to the point of being the public or the crowd, you can't really call it irony. You have to call it vulgarity, or you have to call it something else. Maybe that's...
And I think there's a good case that we live in a highly ironical society as well. I mean, look at, I don't know. I mean, if you really take the 40,000 foot view, I mean, look at modern art, or look at what passes for modern art, right?
Yeah.
Is it vulgar? Does it hold anything as sacred? I mean, or is it
true?
You know what I'm saying? So, just something to think about.
Yeah, vulgarity is confused with art. Yeah. He says that, and this is where he says that even good-natured people, when they become a crowd, act differently, and they become different. They become the public, in quotes. They lose their heart and sympathy and capacity of understanding. So again, I think that plays into what you were saying earlier and what seems to be true. Now here he says something else here that I not sure I agree with. We could discuss this. Laughter is feared by the crowd because it isolates the man and creates or appeals to the individual. Now, I kind of know what he's saying, but yet I'm not sure I can completely agree with him, because large groups of people, like on stage, when you're going to a movie theater or when you're going to a performance or stand-up comedy, people tend to laugh together in groups. Even they laugh when they wouldn't have laughed as an individual, because it's something simply aren't funny, but people laugh anyway at it, because laughter becomes a release for tension. So perhaps he simply means laughter of the individual man breaks down his false persona. And that I would agree with. When a man laughs, he kind of, it's like if you've got your tuxedo on and you're trying to be very prim and proper, and somebody tells a joke and you just do what's that called, a spit gag, and spit out the drink that you've had, and you're just laughing uncontrollably. You've just lost that false persona, and you are who you are now. And I agree with that, but I'm not sure that follows true with the crowd.
Well, I don't know what to think. I mean, I have to think about it in context some more. There are also, I find myself laughing at a lot of things that the world takes very seriously.
Yeah.
And, I've oftentimes wondered if that laughter at the world, like people are like, oh, this is a very serious thing, I've got to hang on every world, and I'm just like, psh. I wonder if that sort of makes me look maniacal in some way, and if it's the fact that I can laugh at something that other people take seriously, if that laughter is then threatening to the crowd. And I mean, I haven't thought about it too much, but there is a sense when you're laughing when you're not supposed to, right? When you're not being urged by the laugh track, right? That is either falsely stimulated because you're in a studio setting, or because it's part of the shared culture. When you're like for instance, like like if I were to say something, I laugh at the dollar bill, right?
Yeah.
That's like something that someone could be committed into an insane asylum.
Yeah,
for, right? It doesn't even make any sense, right? Like the average person can't even comprehend what I'm saying when I say I laugh at the dollar bill.
Mm-hmm.
That's like it's like someone saying like that you're getting into an argument with a question mark. It doesn't. It's totally surreal. It doesn't make any sense, and I could see how that could. I could see how that could be very unsettling to the crowd. That sort of laughter, understanding the absurdity of certain things, could be threatening to the crowd. Do you think that's what Kierkegaard means? Because I laugh at the dollar bill.
Yeah, I think that would have to be closer to what he means to it to make sense of it. Yeah. So he says now the next step for him to try to follow his role as an author and to make the transition from the aesthetic to the religious is changing his persona, his public persona, to become actually more true to himself now, to finally be able to be Kierkegaard. He considered that dialectically he would recover the use of indirect communication. And dialectic here, I think, is to come to a conclusion through reason, if hopefully I'm correct about that superficial definition, but that's the best I could come up with for dialectic. The reader was not able to directly relate himself to Kierkegaard, which we know because of this indirect method, because he wasn't writing directly to the author. He was always writing indirectly to the author. Making the reader think through what the author is saying to come to his conclusion. Another reason is that no one really knew the real Kierkegaard, like we were talking before. He wasn't that open, at least publicly. We can see why now, but he wasn't that open publicly as to who he was. Nobody really knew him. He had very few friends. I think he had only one friend, one good friend, and he was still in communication with one of his brothers, but that kind of faded away too. So he didn't have a whole lot of people that he could just talk openly with. But
why do you think that was the case? Why do you think he was so reclusive in that way? Because the reason why I ask is because I'm trying to understand it for myself. I've created my own little monastery here.
Yeah.
And I get, I find the research and the promulgation of that research to be very gratifying. And because, like I've mentioned earlier in this conversation, because when I do go out into public, it's, there are always communication issues. I personally have been I've grown very okay with the idea of not having friends. I have you, but you're across the country. But why do you think? Do you think Kierkegaard was just misanthropic? Do you think he just didn't feel like regular people could understand his thoughts? Do you think he thought it was a waste of time? Why do you think he couldn't form those relationships? I personally, there's not been a big motive for my lack of relationships. It's just something that's naturally developed, I suppose.
Well, I was just quickly jotting down 3 ideas that were coming to my mind. And, the first one was, I think he felt like an outsider. I think he knew he didn't think like other people, and it made him feel like an outsider. And the public kind of, after a while, treated him like an outsider. I think he always has this self-reflection he talks about. And when you are very self-reflective, I think that's how you become. You become isolated.
Are you like this?
Yes.
Yeah. I don't know. I only know you via Google Hangouts, and I feel like if we were in the same town, we would hang out all the time.
Oh yeah. I would hang out with certain people. I think he thought that social life was superficial. I don't like it for that reason. I'm reflecting myself through him through me, and so I find that social settings are very superficial. Everybody is behaving in a way in which they really are not. And I couldn't bear going to a dinner party or a cocktail party. I just couldn't bear it.
But here's a question, though. Are you, me, and Kierkegaard doing something unbiblical by not being amongst the public?
I think we need to be public. We have to force ourselves to be public. I have to force myself to be public. I teach a Bible study. You know, new people come in and I try to act very warmly. But that's because I have a mission. I see myself in that mission, in that frame of mind as a missionary at that point. So I'm not really being all that self-reflective. I'm seeing something higher that I'm doing that overcomes my other senses here of being an outsider. But I also find that society is distracting. It distracts me from my... If society distracts me from my mission, then I don't want to have anything to do with it. If I can function in my missionary state in public, then I'm fine with it in society. But that's kind of how I look at it. But the funny thing, though, you know, when I go out in public, like when I go to the coffee shop and that, I'm friendly with everybody. But I think there's a difference between being friendly and being a friend. I have some friends there, but mostly I'm just friendly with people. And I know you are too. I know wherever you go, you smile and talk to people and are friendly with them. But that doesn't mean, you know, you're going to pal around with them that much, because you probably get bored unless you're talking about the things you want to talk about.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, that's the interesting... it's like been a real therapy session today. That's okay. I think people find it intriguing to find out who we are as people.
Yeah.
But it's part of the mental calculation that I make in my head is like... Because I am so intoxicated with learning, I'm kind of like... I'm like, I could go out amongst the public in some way. Mm-hmm. Or I could just learn more. And I think to myself, the chances are I can learn more if I just stay home.
Yeah.
But then this raises fundamental questions about what we ought to be doing with our life, you know.
Yeah.
I don't know. I probably just need a girlfriend.
Well, we go through stages too, Luke. The Lord walks with us. We go through stages, and He puts us where we need to be. So don't worry about it. So now he says that he now acted as the religious man and made himself laughable to the public. Such a man, the religious man, is not in the majority, and if he is popular with the world, he is not, in fact, a religious author. See, that kind of plays into what we were just talking about. If you are a religious person, people don't want to sit and talk about the Bible with you, or about God with you, or about spiritual things with you. And those are the things we love to talk about. And you just don't fit into the world. You're not popular with the world. The true religious author is always polemical, he says. Polemical meaning always challenging and defending himself. He's always the object of the public's attack. When asked about his basic truth for being right, he gives this answer. Page 59, another quotation. And I told you I had massive quotations today here. 59. And the essentially religious author has but one fulcrum for his lever, namely the miraculous syllogism. When anyone asks him on what he bases the claim that he's right and that he is the truth, he utters, his answer is, I prove it by the fact that I am persecuted. This is the truth, and I can prove it by the fact that I am derided. That is, he does not substantiate the truth or the righteousness of his cause by appealing to the honor and reputation, etc., which he enjoys, but he does quite the contrary. So,
I like this quote. I like this quote a lot because, and I think there's a lot of truth in it, because it seems to me wherever the thing is that's being mocked or persecuted or dismissed or whatever, those ought to be the things that we first investigate. And what's been mocked more than anything in Christianity, right?
Yeah.
And Christian authors. So, but I don't know if that holds true. I don't know if that's a truism that should apply to everything. But if someone tells me,
no, I don't think so.
Yeah, I'm of the mentality now that if something is, I just want to I want to just find all the things that people say are crazy and insane and worthless and stupid and consult those first. Because they are being, in a way, persecuted by the world. I'm just please tell me what you're trying to say.
Yeah. But I think that he gives I think he gives kind of a proverbial truth. If somebody is ultra successful in the world, we have to at least think about his religiousness or her religiousness and see, are they really a religious person if they're so accepted by the world? So there's that piece of truth in there.
But you're just giving the world what it wants. If you're successful in the world, you're just giving the world what it wants, and we've already established that the world is drunk and vulgar.
Yeah, that's what we have to do. Have to consider all of that, and so not that we're picking on any individuals here, but we're picking on a kind of an overall methodology of life, I guess, or philosophy on life. So now at the top of page 60, he says that when one enters the gates of death, he has to lay aside all the pomp and grandeur and reputation that he has, which is true. When we die, we're not going to be able to bring, our best clothes with us, so to speak. We're going to appear naked before God, is the way he puts it. Having been a religious teacher, he will be judged by the true religious teachers. Now, I find it interesting here because you and we read the discourses. So we know that he's familiar with James. And I wondered why he didn't quote James here, because this is what James says about teachers. In James chapter 3, verse 1 and 2, it says, "Be not many of you teachers, my brethren, knowing that we shall receive heavier judgment. For in many things we all stumble. If any stumbleth not in word, the same is a perfect man, able to bridle the whole body also." So I've always found this a sobering thought for those who want to be pastors and teachers, that you will be judged with a heavier judgment. So be careful when you want to pick not a mission, but a
debate, or profession,
a profession. A profession or a vocation. If you want to be a pastor, it's not just standing up in front of everybody and wearing a robe and being superior and having everybody throw accolades upon you, because you're going to be judged with a higher, heavier judgment. So it's a very sobering thought. So I'm not sure why you didn't quote James, but go ahead.
What's interesting? I'm trying to think here. I mean, does he do many biblical citations in this book? Because it seems to be, I just off the top of my head, it doesn't seem like he does as much biblical citation here.
That's interesting.
As he has in the other texts. And then you have to ask the question why he doesn't, if that's the case.
I didn't pick up on that either way. I don't remember what he did either way.
I don't think he's quoting a lot of the Bible in this one, which is, not. I mean, we know his format pretty well, and many of his texts.
Yeah.
He's, it's pretty all over the place.
Yeah.
It's not all over the place, scattered, but he's pretty quick to quote scripture in his other texts. I haven't done a statistical analysis of the appearance of scripture here, but it strikes me as that it's employed to a lesser extent in this.
It is. I think you're right. I think you're right about that. Yeah.
Why do you think that's the case?
I think he's being more. This is more cathartic for him.
I think you're right.
And so he doesn't want to make it look like a sermon, but he wants to make it look like he's really telling us who he is and what he's doing. So that's just a guess.
Yeah, I think so. It has a more personal dimension to it.
Yeah. The individual is an oddity, and the oddest one is Socrates. It's the crowd that is evil and the crowd that threatens us. Salvation is only found in the individual, and we must then become an individual. So this is, again, he echoes the theme that he's echoed throughout all his writings, is to try to bring the person away from the crowd into being an individual, which is sometimes a fearsome place for a person to be, where they have to face reality as an individual, not getting lost in the crowd, not being protected by the crowd, or for that matter, being protected by their alter ego. I've seen lots. I live near a high school, and I see high school kids, and every once in a while I see somebody dressed. They almost look like they're going to Halloween because they're dressed in a Matrix outfit. They look like they're right out of the Matrix or something. And I'm thinking, this is that type of person. They're hiding their true self in this alter ego. They might as well wear a Superman outfit to school. Well, or Batman or something.
I have to say, when I was younger, I was a pretty eccentric dresser. And
you are?
I think it's... well, I was. I should show you my jean jacket with all the patches on it.
Okay.
Yeah, but I think it's because you have not lived long enough to be truly intellectually individuated. Mm-hmm. So therefore, your only recourse to sate the nonconformist streak is to try to superficially differentiate yourself, which just sets up this very interesting paradox that at this stage in life, there was a song I used to like, I think it was by a band called Austin Lounge Lizards. It was like and there's a line in the song, it was like, all of Susie's friends were nonconformists, so she became one too, or something like that. Right. It's just a superficial form of individuation.
It is. It is. But it's something that we can observe. I just wanted to use that to reflect on what he's saying, that it's very easy to get caught up in that mentality, to drift away from yourself by imitating another individual or by getting lost in conformity. So it's, sometimes hard to differentiate the two, really. But that's why I brought it up. He says that the reader is his lover and will understand how his existence and his writings fit together and how they transformed into the religious from the aesthetic. He believes that if he did not do this, it would have been a confusion for the reader as to who he was. So since you and I both love Kierkegaard, I think we can see why he did this. We can see, as you called it, the metamorphosis or the transition or transformation from one to the other, at least in his portrayal of it, from the aesthetic into the religious. So are you able to, I'm sure you're able to comprehend it, but did you want to say something about your comprehension of that change?
No, I think I wish I could have witnessed it. That's all. I wish I could have, I wish I could have witnessed it.
Yeah.
Right? I would have liked to have seen how I would like to see a biography of Kierkegaard done sort of cinematically and see if we can see these.
Oh, that would be wonderful.
Right. How he transitioned both intellectually and externally, and I think that'd be kind of an interesting plot for a movie. I saw a movie over the weekend that was sort of tried to render a behind-the-scenes look at this cult classic movie called The Room. The movie I saw was called The Disaster Artist or something like that, and where they try to give a documentary sort of feel to the making of this cult classic movie. I'd be very interested in seeing if someone could chronologize, if that's the right word, Kierkegaard's development through this authorial plan.
Yeah, I'm not sure why they haven't had a good movie on Kierkegaard. Maybe it's coming down the road. Maybe sooner or later somebody will get the idea.
maybe we are accelerating that as we promulgate Kierkegaard's
so.
ideas on the internet.
Hopefully there's some potential studio producers out there that will say, hey, that's an idea, let's do that.
Yeah, the time is right for Kierkegaard. Big bucks.
That would be great if we could play a role in bringing that about. Okay, now my last paragraph here. The change attempted to make the reader, this transition, attempted to make the reader more inward and reflective. It was through this that he would be able to see deeper into the meaning of his existence and his need for God. That's my summary of what his idea of transition, how he would transition from the aesthetic to the religious. So now I wanted to ask you, I know I had time to prepare my statement and you don't have as much time here, but how did you view the theory that he used? How was he going to change a person from the aesthetic into the religious? I say here that he was going to try to make the person more inward and reflective, to make him see deeper into himself and his meaning that he has before God, and his meaning and his need for God. So that's how I kind of summarize. But how would you summarize it if you could? I don't want to put you on the spot, but I want to give you your opportunity.
I think he just kind of wears away at the egotism through these different manifestations of himself, and naturally presents the subject and the reader with the limits of that existential prerogative, or existential point of view, I should say. And I think it works. I think it's working whether or not the reader actually knows it. And I don't know. I see my own life as sort of a personal testament of that.
Okay.
You know,
how can we, you, me, and other listeners, accomplish this today? Is there a way that we can accomplish this transition, because there are so many people caught up in the aesthetic Christianity that aren't getting the deeper meaning of Christianity and what it really means to be a child of God, a true child of God? So how can we, or can we, do anything?
I think we can. I think there are respectable ways that we can do it, and I think there are not so respectable ways that we can do it.
Okay, a sample of each one. Let's try that.
The respectable way that we could do it is, I think, that it really is a clarion call for all sort of authentically existing Christians to become deeply embedded in the artistic and academic worlds. I think there needs to be a revolution in terms of Christian scholarship and art. I think more movies, more songs, more books, a greater understanding of man's secular knowledge, and showing its limitations in all forms, aesthetic and scholastic, I think would do a great service for advancing people along a similar program. Now, people may say, well, look, we already have that community. We have Kirk Cameron making Left Behind movies, and we got all these Christian parody songs of the real ones out there. No. Like, I think need to do really mind-bending, beautiful films and pieces of music and things of that nature. Not this cheap art of Christendom, if it can even be called art.
Yeah.
And then the less respectable way, I think, is to expose evil. And I was talking to you off air about this earlier. Is that Christians have to be, in my view, this is not Kierkegaard's view, so I would depart from him here. Is that I think they need to be willing to take a stand and expose the evil and the corruption in our society. Mm-hmm. And I just don't see a lot of Christians doing that like they need to. I think the truth of our society is too disturbing that they can't handle it, and then if they can discover it for themselves, there's too much shame associated with doing the exposing. You don't need a thought police when you have a hive mind. You know, it's really hard to speak out. Hence why I'm dancing around what I really want to say.
Yeah.
Like I can't say right here what I really want to say because I'm afraid that it will. I'm not afraid right here, but it's like I worry that it would be imprudent for me to make a manifesto at this moment in time. So I don't know. That's the way I think that. I mean, personally, that's what I would like to see happen with Christians. One's respectable, one's not.
Yeah. Well, I hope we can stay on the respectable side. And,
I know. I'm not going to say anything crazy here. Don't worry. Just off air.
Off air, huh? For my ears
off
only,
air.
huh?
Yeah, just for you.
Okay, well, that's where we're going to leave it today. And next week or 2 weeks, we will pick it up where he talks about the shared divine governance had in my authorship. So what role did God play in Kierkegaard's writing? And that's going to be very interesting.
I will say this. Kierkegaard did expose some stuff later on in his life with the moment. That text.
Yeah.
So maybe Kierkegaard would endorse the non-respectable side of what I just said here, in my own defense.
Okay. In your own defense. The moment, that was a very short work, wasn't it, if I remember correctly?
Yeah, it was his last one, but I'm telling you, man, he's on fire. I like it. It might be one of my favorites. So.
We might have to do it.
Yeah, definitely. All right, thank you so much, Bob. I'll have this edited later tonight and up on the interwebs and the website and the app and all of that fun stuff. I know it's a little confusing right now for those individuals who have the beta version of the app and are using the website. Just be patient with me. Rome wasn't built in a day. So, but I'll have everything out there for you to consume on at least 3 or 4 platforms here in the next few hours. So thank you again, Bob.
You're welcome, and thank you.
All right. I'll talk to you soon, buddy.
Okay, bye-bye.